Hello. Hello. I'm mad about stuff. A lot of stuff. There's a few things I want to talk about this edition of, or this inaugural edition of It's Not Funny Anymore. So I'll play one song, and then we'll get into my first rant of the show. But expect talks on populism and the use of othering to gain votes and how that is a slippery slope. Expect talks on cultural hegemonic ideals in relation to cultural Marxism, not the conspiracy theory. So FAD voters, don't get afraid. Come closer to the stereo system and listen. And I think we'll end with just a general screed on colonialism. Yeah, that's the plan. Anyway, I hope you will enjoy the show.
Ain't never going back the road. I saw bands and I saw hoes. For that, then I smoke. Holy Spirit, holy smoke. Bought the script, ain't prescribed. Fuck the law, don't buy. National bills, brush the grind, seeing colors, ultra wide. Ain't never going back the road. I saw bands and I saw hoes. For that, then I smoke. Holy Spirit, holy smoke. Bought the script, ain't prescribed. Fuck the law, don't buy. National bills, brush the grind, seeing colors, ultra wide. Ain't never going back the road. I saw bands and I saw hoes. For that, then I smoke. Holy Spirit, holy smoke. Bought the script, ain't prescribed. Fuck the law, don't buy. National bills, brush the grind, seeing colors, ultra wide. Ain't never going back the road. I saw bands and I saw hoes. For that, then I smoke. Holy Spirit, holy smoke. Bought the script, ain't prescribed. Fuck the law, don't buy. National bills, brush the grind, seeing colors, ultra wide. Ain't never going back the road. I saw bands and I saw hoes. For that, then I smoke. Holy Spirit, holy smoke. Ain't never going back the road. I saw bands and I saw hoes. For that, then I smoke. Holy Spirit, holy smoke. Bought the script, ain't prescribed. Fuck the law, don't buy. National bills, brush the grind, seeing colors, ultra wide. Ain't never going back the road. I saw bands and I saw hoes. For that, then I smoke. Holy Spirit, holy smoke. Ain't never going back the road. I saw bands and I saw hoes. For that, then I smoke. Holy Spirit, holy smoke. Bought the script, ain't prescribed. Fuck the law, don't buy. National bills, brush the grind, seeing colors, ultra wide. Ain't never going back the road. I saw bands and I saw hoes. For that, then I smoke. Holy Spirit, holy smoke. Bought the script, ain't prescribed. Fuck the law, don't buy. National bills, brush the grind, seeing colors, ultra wide.
We've got something a bit ambient going. I can start my screen now. Yay, big fun. So the first part of this rant was going to be about othering. As we know, there's been a big rise in populist parties winning all over Europe. The Brothers of Italy under Giorgia Meloni in Italy. The FVD had their moment, and now it's the farmers movement, or as they're called in Dutch, the Boerenburgerbeweging. Austria has a long and illustrious history with, well, I guess if you're European, nationalism. The UK went through Brexit. And, well, there is one large commonality between all these parties. Although I do tend to forget about France all the time because, well, you know, fuck 'em. But there you have Marine Le Pen and her party. Oh wow, this is very the music's quite distracting. I think I'll just wait for this to end and I'll play something else and get into it. But I've just listed some parties, some populist parties throughout Europe that have won or gained major momentum in like the last 10 years or so. And they all have one thing in common, and that is the othering of people. And what I mean by othering is that they select a group that sits outside the main consciousness of the national image. So say in the case of France, it's immigrants coming by boat. In Italy, it's kind of the same thing. Well, just generally in Europe these days, it's immigrants. In the 1930s, it would have been the Jewish people, and particularly also in the mid-2000s to late 2000s, it was people with a Muslim background coming in from North Africa. And, yeah. We'll talk about what this does and why it's actually very, very dangerous for parties to engage in this type of behavior in order to gain votes, because they use, well, common, I'd say, very common gripes, usually from working class people throughout the countries that they are in a very cynical way. In order to gain votes, which is not very bueno. But we'll get into why that's not very bueno once I've found something that I can really put in on the background, maybe some Brian Eno or something. Then we'll talk more about this. But first, here's some new Matthew David from his EP On Mushrooms, a primer for mycelium music. Okay, perfect. Malibu to the rescue with So Far Out of Love. Anyway, back to the rant. Back to what's important. That's discussing things about politics that annoy me. Anyway, so the main commonality that all these populist parties have, and let me first start by explaining what populism is. Populism in politics is defined as a party that uses an ideological strain of politics that is mainly focused on gaining popular support. So instead of just being purely ideological in mind, so just talking about, say, look at liberalism, about the invisible hand of the market that would aid a liberalized and open free market. Populism mainly focuses on problems that people have, and they try to get votes from those people by speaking directly to what they want to hear, what they need. So it can be either, it doesn't really matter on what spectrum of the left-right divide you are on. Populism can be used in both cases, as directly just means appealing to popular issues in order to gain the vote of the people, the vox populus or whatever. And so a thing that right-wing populist parties love doing is using a scapegoat for dire economic crises. So if you look at the history of the rise of the far right in various situations and times, especially, let's say, post First World War into the Second World War, you can see that a lot of these start because of huge economic downturns. So you also see that the first populist kind of right-wing parties in Europe really start springing up around the time that we had the first main economic crash post-Great Depression in 2007. I don't know if anyone's old enough that's listening to remember, but everyone just went broke because of subprime mortgages. But anyway, I digress. What you see is that in times of hyperinflation, when a lot of people become very poor, things become very expensive, you can start really attracting the working class to vote for you by directly speaking to their issues. So what a lot of these far-right populists do is that instead of, say, addressing the actual issues, in this case, you know, a way to free market with not a lot of checks for what banks could do and the way in which investments happened in the United States and beyond, they would just attack immigrants. They'd say it's a combination of immigrants stealing your jobs and the liberal elites in power using that in order to fuck you over. You know, it's the same bullshit that you even hear now, where it's like, oh, people coming in boats to invade us. So it's like the use of a mixture of conspiracy theories and actual dire economic circumstances in order to attract votes. Now that we have a general understanding of what this othering is and the main game plan, we're going to talk about why this is bad. Beyond that, it's just immoral to blame people fleeing horrible circumstances to, you know, live a better life. Like, come on. The place that you're born has no real definition on who you are or gives you like a certain right to a piece of land. I personally believe, at least. So now some other music just to listen to, and then we'll continue on to part 2, why othering is bad.
Niggas don't rap no more, they just sell clothes. So I should probably quit and start a line of bad flow. Somehow, like this Siri, X-Siri, if I'm that nigga, should probably answer back, don't ask me stupid shit, my nigga. I'm a stone cold degenerate, working up with no membership. A minute late, you wonder where the bitches went. My manuscript, I can't handle it. Eat your ass like I'm cannabis. I show up on your screen like telling evangelist. And I have faith that I can clap those cheeks like getting brown to your yard need more than the milkshake. But I have to say I'm up, they wanna see me fall off, but they not sprout. I keep the customs at the front now. I run around the corner by the stop flow.
serving these niggas like I'm on a bean. Blood raw, I don't cook what I eat. Heard shot, bitch, I think I'm Korean. I don't believe what you saying them beats. They give you hands and feet. Why you still posting me? Why you ain't grab no beat? This nigga still on my feet. Talking with shit a D. Shoulda, coulda, woulda, ass nigga. Why the fuck you ain't get it? The way that you talk, somebody should be missing my boy. It ain't real. Listen, you see that. You can't be broke and over 30. Get your ass beat. You see that. Come on, bro.
Part 3 of my rant about othering and populism. So now that we understand what populism is and the use of othering as their main game plan, why is this bad? Well, the reason why this is bad is that, first of all, it is of course immoral and deceitful because usually the problems aren't actually solved by the othering. The main plan, the main aim is to galvanize a group of useful idiots in a way. I wouldn't say they're idiots, that's also kind of mean. Just people that have real, actual problems in their life in terms of economy and stuff to garner power in order to bring yourself into a position of power where then you can start putting in the main work of your ideology. The problem is, oftentimes these people, when presented with the actual ideals behind what far-right populist parties want to do, which is like highly conservative, very socially conservative, economically not so very smart, very right-wing, oftentimes, again, liberal market-based ideas, you see that people normally kind of opt out. They wouldn't really go for it. The problem in these cases is that the only effective way to continue maintaining your popularity is by blaming more and more people. So what you see is that it starts usually with blaming immigrants or someone that is outside the national consciousness. At that point, it becomes sort of a race to the bottom of the barrel, where you start with someone outside of the national identity, and then you move closer and closer and closer into the national identity until you're basically left with nothing. So this is what would have happened in World War II if Hitler would have gotten his way. So his plan was first the Roma, the weak, the Jews. So he started off with those because he was able to other them out of society because in olden times, I guess they were already not seen as part of the German national identity. They were always seen as something outside of it. But what you'd get after that is that they'd of course go for more and more people because you'd have to maintain power by continually blaming others as a danger. So you create an us versus them dynamic, but you continuously have to create a new them. So in the case of the Nazis, we don't really know, I guess, what would have happened, but if you look at already their like racial purity ideas, you could, I guess, surmise that they would have gone for first people that were weak, because he also had a very Darwinian notion of evolutionary struggle. So his whole idea was that you had to struggle in order to be strong. That's why his book Mein Kampf is called Mein Kampf. It's about his struggle and his whole, they started already with murdering people that had Down syndrome, that had certain birth defects. I think he would have continued on that line by just continuously purifying until the only thing you would pretty much have left were what he viewed as, blonde Aryan people, and you wouldn't have much left. So it would continue. So, at some point he'd start going for people with black hair, brown hair. That's kind of how it goes. Another great example of this is Israel, and it's actually quite a topical way of looking at it because that's what's happening right now. I know it's very contentious to discuss this, but I'd like to, first of all, make sure that everyone understands that this is a talk about the internal politics of Israel, and it's not necessarily about its relation to the Palestinian people per se. For example, what you see now is that a far-right coalition has gotten into power and has become vehemently unpopular with a large part of the Israeli population, in the sense that they've been massively protesting against certain laws that the Knesset, that's the Israeli parliament, wants to introduce. So how does an extreme right party like that, or how does an extreme right coalition like that come into power in a country like Israel that, has a people whose history have already been marred and marked by horrible things that happen in relation to right-wing extremists? We'll talk about that in part 4, where we look at a modern example of othering and how that leads to basically more and more problems, because there is no end goal. It's just a way of maintaining power. Part 4 of my political rant. Or 5. I don't even know what part we're on anymore. But, okay, we are on 4. Let's go. So, we were going to talk about Israel, but the internal politics of Israel. So, Israel has always maintained a slightly liberal, centrist-leaning government when it comes to like the social aspects, because that's how they always distinguished themselves from the rest of the Middle East. They were the sort of bastion of social progressive ideals within the Middle East, where people that were LGBTQ plus could be free, be themselves, and where you didn't have the sort of social conservatism that you have in other countries. But what you see now is that Benjamin Netanyahu has clung on to power, and there's been a very big rise in preference for the extreme, because everyone keeps acting like they don't have, that they're not very popular, but you don't make a coalition with these parties. You can't make a coalition with small parties to maintain power. They have to have some form, like a certain amount of seats in order to be able to govern or have a mandate. So what you see is that the way in which these parties got to power was by continuously pointing at the issue of the Palestinians. So they kept saying, hey, vote for us if you want security, if you want a prosperous future for Israel, which, is a genuine concern for a lot of people in Israel, their safety and their continued survival when faced by a lot of different situations. Of course, that's a whole different thing to get into. Maybe at the end we might talk about it. But anyway, to get back to what I was talking about. So they used first the othering of the Palestinians, and I guess there's an argument to be made that to a certain degree they have pretty much been defeated. They're definitely a subjugated class of people within that sphere of the world. What you then see in Israeli politics and the nation, especially from the extreme side, is that they start othering other people. So it started with Palestinians. Then they moved on to Sephardi Jews, who are Jews that come from Ethiopia and North Africa. So you already see that there's also a sort of white supremacist tinge to this, where they first get rid of the Palestinians because they're not Jewish. Then you get rid of the Jews that are black. And there is an argument to be said that Ethiopian Jews, although they do get civil rights, they're considered citizens of the country, they get treated like absolute shit in society. There's a definite case for a lot of racism against them. They're not seen as real Jews. What you will see next, and what is already sort of happening next, is that Mizrahi Jews are being targeted by this extreme right coalition. Ironically, Ben Gvir, part of this, or the head of this extreme right coalition, is Mizrahi himself. Mizrahi Jews come from the Middle East. But what you're seeing is already that now the idea is on them, because a lot of these Mizrahi Jews are the same ones that are bringing their more liberal-minded ideals to the place. They tend to be on the more left-leaning side of the argument. So once that's happened, or once that happens, you can see that there's this general othering going on. Like it moves from Palestinians, who to a certain extent you could argue is an issue, and then it goes back to another form of peoples, the same people that you kind of invited into the country, and then it goes further and further and further, because you have to continuously choose a scapegoat, choose an enemy to maintain power, because the position that you are going for is just not popular enough on its own. And that's just kind of fucked up, if you ask me. And that's why everyone should really worry about right-wing populism. and the use of othering in their political tactics. Because you might think you're safe and you might even agree with them, but what you need to understand is that it's a slippery slope. It keeps going, and who knows, before you know it, you're one of the people that's being othered in the society that you once considered home.
so bright. Light in my eyes. Cause I'm right.
I guess I didn't get to the other subject matter I wanted to speak on. But I think this is probably the most pertinent thing I wanted to get off my chest, because it is something that you should be worried about personally, as a person living in Europe or anywhere else listening to this. See, it's not just crazy people like Trump doing this, where it's like super fucking obvious. It's a lot of people getting suckered into these ideas. Like, yes, be worried about farmers in the Netherlands. Yes, they are getting short-shifted. But look at the other policies that the BBB wants to enact. Look at the fact that it's just VVD plus some populist ideals. And look at how they will have to continue going at people. So now they're going at the government. They're using the plight of the farmers. It's the climate activists versus the farmers. But it's going to continue from there, because there is no other way for them to maintain their platform. Because in the end, when compared to what most people want in this country, or at least what most working people want, is just not that popular. Like, their economic plans are disastrous. Look at the FVD. They use a combination of Corona conspiracies, immigration, and Islamophobic fears to bolster power. But in the end, it's just a party full of pretty fucking rich people, with really, really well-educated rich people, using these working class fears in a very cynical way to garner more power. And of course, you know, they imploded in such a way that it became a lot more obvious with their like bullshit anti-Semitism, which, you know, fuck them for that. It's not cool. But it became obvious. And the same is the case for Marine Le Pen and all these other parties. Look at Giorgia Meloni. She presented herself as an anti-immigrant person for the basic family in the traditional family in Italy. And she's eroding away slowly the rights of people. They tried to introduce an anti-rave bill, which wasn't actually against illegal raves. It was designed in such a way to ensure that people could protest. They went back on it when people realized what was happening and actually made it about raves, but still, they tried to do it. Look at Marine Le Pen. She's using immigration as a bulwark, as like a pulpit to stand upon. But if you look at their ideas, it's the same social conservatism that they're trying to push through. And I think that in 2023, we live in a world where people, I think, give less and less of a shit about what the other is doing. We might have, you know, once in a while, people arguing with each other on the internet. But you need to remember that these socio-cultural flashpoints are being used as a way of garnering power and to distract you from actual pertinent issues like the economy and the rising cost of living. Like, it's easy to be like, oh, look at transgender people, oh, look at this, to distract you from the fact that we're all just getting fucked over. It's an easy way to use immigrants as a way of gaining more power and saying that you're there for the working people, when it's not immigrants that are affecting your jobs. It's the fact that the economy is being perpetually, or your country is being perpetually mismanaged at an economic level by the rising power of late-stage capitalism. So, if you really do care about working class struggles and working class people, then look at parties that actually care about tackling these problems at the root, and that don't use other people and conspiracy theories to build their base, because that just leads to a slippery slope that might end up with you being seen as the enemy as well. I'm gonna play, I think, 2 more songs. And yeah, that was my rant for today. No joke. And yeah, I don't think that shit's funny. Like, it's fucking scary. Anyway, that's probably because I'm also half black. Who knows? At some point they might be like, well, no, you should go to Rwanda or some shit. They do it in America already, even though I was born here. So yeah, Be afraid. Be afraid. Oh, and happy birthday to the peeps at OS. Love y'all. Have a fun night tonight. And yeah, to many more years of being the kings in the north. And most of all, shout out to Relay for organizing Relay. I really love this delay. I don't know if you can you hear it? Yeah, party people. Got the African Bombada special going. Yeah.
First off, fuck Elon Musk, $8 too much, bitch, that's expensive. For the hoes in the back and the crack in the slack, my truth is the leak and I meant it. I don't really check, cause I got no respect, and these niggas might know me like a dentist. City all about free speech, so they hear some shit and they get offended. This ain't what you want, no, this ain't what you want. Fuck y'all niggas, I feel like Papa John. Left respect to the fake, I'm Tony Khan. And they hate what I say, cause I ain't wrong. What kind of rapping is this? The economy rap niggas piss, you know it. I'm gonna take my bitch, that pussy get feeling like this, she know it. These niggas be texting with kids, it doesn't get stranger than this, that's whole shit. Fuck the bar, I don't fuck with you niggas like I'm Hulk Hogan. Wait, I am me, red eyes with a shot of repeat. While you stretching and tweaking your tweets, I've been stretching your girl, iron sheet. What's the deets? In the crib, chicken swelling for weeks. Watch your energy, watch what you tweet. You can go from Elon to Ye, no weed, but